Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier on, the World Bank says South Africa is by far the largest, or social grants are by far the largest facet of South Africa's social protection system in terms of the number of people covered. South Africa spends more on social assistance than most other countries globally, but this aid is still not available to a large share of the working age members of the population, given the unemployment benefits are available only to people who work in the formal sector. So we speak now to Brenton van Vrede, who's Chief Director of Social Assistance at the Department of Social Development. Now, it is said that social grant payments equate to about 3.3% of GDP. So recently there have also been renewed calls for a universal basic income grant, as you know that, but the Treasury has said that this does not yet feature in its budget considerations. But how do these social grants assist? The calls, as you know, for a basic social grant increased during COVID-19 and the unrest we saw in July. So there was emergency relief from government to deal with this. But what exactly do we mean by social grants, and how do we compare to other countries? Let's see if Brenton van Vrede, the Chief Director, Social Assistance at the Department of Social Development, is on the line with us. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. van Vrede.
Thanks, and good afternoon to you and your listeners.
Okay, so how much do social grants account for in South Africa? I mentioned that it's something like 3.3% of GDP, but do we know what the actual amount is?
So, on average, on sort of a normal year outside of the COVID additional spending that we do, we spend about 180 billion rands. And in last year, we spent about 55 billion rands extra as a result of all our COVID interventions. And in the current year, we'll be spending about 27 billion rands extra as a result of the COVID interventions.
So I'm curious, how is that cake cut up? In 2018, 2019, we believe the South African Social Security Agency paid out 17.8 million grants, and the National School Nutrition Program reached more than 9 million learners. So who actually benefits from this? One may have an idea, but we often hear people say, because you receive one grant, you can't receive the other, even though you actually should be qualifying for both.
Yes, so that's only within the grant system. So, for example, for example, if you're getting an old age grant, you can't get a disability grant. The disability grant, if you reach the particular age, it automatically you'll automatically be converted to an old age pension. But you can get, so for example, an older person, say granny looking after a child, can get both the older person grant for herself and the child support grant. But then when you look at the broader social wage, you are able to access a social grant. You automatically qualify for free no fee school, which basically means you don't have to pay school fees if you're getting a child support grant or a foster child grant or any of the children's grants. Plus, you qualify. Well, it's not automatic, but you would also qualify for social housing as well as the school nutrition program as well. So you would be able to access all those benefits collectively.
We know that South Africa has a large youth population, and I'm hoping that you are still on the line with us. But if about 1 in 3 South Africans is a direct beneficiary of social grants, and majority of those beneficiaries in the system are dominated by older people, what about adolescent youths, whom some say they actually do need that boost to escape the poverty cycle?
Yes, so that in the report that was done by the World Bank that we released in the last week, that was identified as one of the major weaknesses of the current social security system, in that it only really creates access or targets access for about 40% of our population, namely the elderly, the bulk is children, and then people with disabilities. So the bulk of our population, or the largest portion of our population, those who we normally categorize as the working age population, between the ages of 18 and 60, do not have any access to any form of social assistance. So that is one area that government has to consider moving forward. It is something we have made some significant headway in during the COVID period, where you may know we implemented a sort of an unemployment type social relief benefit called the COVID SRD grant, which was about 350 rands, which in the first year went to about 6 million people, and in the current year we estimate that could go up to as much as 9.5 million people.
Now, I'm sure you know that the common lament from the youth is often the lack of consultation in policy design. Let's take the expanded public works program and community work programs, for instance. They're key interventions targeting working age populations. From those that we've spoken to in the past, I know they've complained about the seasonal nature of it, or lack of structure, late payment, if at all, in some cases. So what are you going to do with regards to fixing some of these? And as I mentioned, if you are looking at reworking social grants, especially for these age groups, how are you going to ensure qualitative and quantitative consultation?
So consultation is a key aspect of any policy design process, and normally when we do design these programs, we do conduct extensive consultations. So, for example, as we currently are working on a policy for that age group, 18 to 59, we have put out a discussion document last year. I think it was last year, November, December. We conducted then a round of consultations on that. We're looking at refining that, and we'll have more consultations. But even the whole process up to the legislative development process, which goes to Parliament, there is normally extensive consultations, both before we go there, as well again in the parliamentary cycle, both at the national chambers as well as in the different provincial legislatures. There's quite a lot of consultation that happens in that process.
And it's also been said that although there are several programs in social protection systems that cover working age adults that we've just been speaking about, there is limited coverage. We've seen through COVID-19, even though government has said there are emergency relief measures saying this category would qualify for that, quite a considerable number of people complained of not only not receiving those grants, that even when there was an extension thereof, they still haven't, and they still find themselves in worse off a position. So how do you intend to fix some of these problems?
Okay, so during the COVID period, our biggest challenge, we had was reaching millions of people in a very, very short space of time. Now, if you just look at the way, you look at the capacity or the capability that our South African Social Security Agency has, while we have reached about 18 million grant beneficiaries at the moment, we've built that up over a period of about more than 2 decades, right? So we were able to reach 6 million people in about 3 months, which is quite phenomenal given just the capacity and scale. But the only way we could do that was through the use of digital systems. Now, unfortunately, these were all new systems, had to be developed in a very short space of time. We had to develop it, implement it, and test it while you're implementing. So you have to develop and test and implement all at the same time. And so the first round did lead to very large exclusions. I think our biggest exclusions that we had probably was fixed in the second round. So as I mentioned, the first round reached about 6 million. The second round will reach about 9.5 million. We already see that number very close to 9.5 just after the first month of implementation. I think we were about 8.3 million. We do acknowledge there will still be quite a few exclusions because the digital systems isn't necessarily accessible to all. But it's something we continuously work on and refine and try to improve on those systems so that we are able to reach more. But also, as we're coming out of the lockdowns levels, being in level 1 now, it does enable us also to open up our offices and do more of the sort of traditional systems face-to-face. And hopefully, if the bulk of your people go through the digital systems, we won't have the overcrowding one would expect if everyone had to suddenly start flocking to a office.
Okay, Brenton van Vrede, thank you so much for your time. Chief Director, Social Assistance at the Department of Social Development. And of course, we'll hear more from our viewers on this particular thing. I know it's a big issue, especially as people gear up towards local government elections. We're going to take a quick break.